In this episode of the How to Do Your 20s, we're going to be talking with Alex, who is an expert on nutrition, diet, and I think he's got a really interesting story about how he does consulting now for nutrition full time. And I think for anyone out there that's looking to start a side business or quit their job and do something full time, I think Alex has a really cool story that he's going to share with us. So, Alex, first off, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, Travis, thanks for having me. I appreciate your time.
So let's start off. Can you tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into nutrition in the first place?
Yeah, so I graduated college back in 2009 with a degree in early childhood education. So for a long time, I kind of wanted to be a preschool teacher. So when I graduated, I got a full-time job as a preschool teacher and went right into it. Immediately, what I noticed was that a lot of the kids that I had in my class all had very specific dietary restrictions. And so being the person that they spent the most time with, roughly 8 to 10 hours a day, I had to be really hyper aware of what kids could have what foods and what kids couldn't have other foods. And the biggest thing was I could notice an immediate difference in them, their behavior, their ability to concentrate, their mood, their behavior, everything like that, if they would have something that they wouldn't. So let's say, for example, a kid would show up with their grandparents who were meaning well, giving them a big bran muffin before bringing them into class, and I knew that that kid was gluten-free. I could tell within probably 20 to 30 minutes how the rest of the day was going to go since he had that, but that wasn't necessarily something that he was supposed to have. And it kind of made me question a lot of how I'd eaten my entire life. I just saw the dramatic impact that it had on these kids and on their own behavior, their mood, their energy. And, I was always a pretty active kid, but I always carried around a little bit of baby fat. But, I was like 22 or 23 years old, so it wasn't really baby fat anymore. So it led me to kind of question the way that I'd eaten for a while. Along from being, kind of chubby, I also had really intense sugar cravings. I also had extreme energy problems throughout the day. If I didn't have a cup of coffee at noon, I would always crash. And so it kind of sent me down this path of experimenting with my own diet and finding the framework that helped me to kind of look, feel, and perform at my very best. And along the way, I was able to help out a bunch of other people who I saw that had kind of similar struggles. And I had a few different people in my life really encourage me to give a shot at doing this full time. And so in doing so, I found the Nutritional Therapy Association, and I went back to school while I was still a teacher, which was a very interesting aspect of it all, because I was able to take what I was learning in my nutrition program and actually teach it to kids in the classroom before kind of launching into doing the nutrition thing full time.
So, first question actually for you. So you talked about a lot of the kids had some kind of a nutritional restriction. My question is, do you think that when I was a kid, it was the same thing except we just weren't as aware of it? Or do you think something's changed with kids where they're more sensitive to foods now?
That's a really good question. I think that parents are a lot more aware of it. I think that with the rise in the amount of like naturopathic doctors and things like that, I think that there are parents that are just a lot more aware of the overall problems that kids are experiencing. But I do think that our food has predominantly changed. The way that we've eaten in the past couple years, or for a long time actually, has been, moved from a lot of really nutrient dense whole foods to a lot of highly convenient processed foods that contain a number of additives and other things that we probably haven't eaten for the majority of our time.
So one of the things I saw on your blog that you talk about is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically fat loss for travelers. I think it's a book that you have.
hmm
Let's talk a little bit about that. So, because a lot of the people listening to this podcast, they like to travel. What kind of advice do you have for people that are traveling that want to stay healthy?
So the biggest thing that I would say is, number one, your overall diet is going to control a lot of what happens, like the 80-20 rule that a lot of people adhere to. So if you're traveling, situations aren't going to be perfect. And rather than trying to have a perfect plan to stick to, just do the best that you can in every situation. That's typically the best. Far too often, I find people who have kind of the all or nothing mentality. So they're either on the diet, they're doing it perfectly, or they're completely off of it and not doing it very well at all. And so the biggest thing that I always try to help people wrap their mind around is you're going to be in a lot of imperfect situations. Just do the absolute best that you can well in that situation. And that's all anybody can ask of you. From there, I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people miss is low-level activity. So you may not be able to get out and go to a gym, 3 or 4 times if you're traveling for business or something like that. But getting out and walking and exploring the city and things like that, I think, can be a huge help. Also, on that side, I think one of the big things too is to really just kind of prioritize protein. It is the highest satiety nutrient. It's the one that helps us to maintain the most muscle mass while losing fat. It's really easy to find good sources of it out there. So if you kind of focus on some of the bigger rocks and don't worry about the smaller things, I think people will have a lot greater success on this all.
Yeah, great advice. And let me ask you too. I know we're jumping around all over the place here, but we've talked about a healthy diet a little bit here. But what does that mean exactly for you, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it means that, the majority of the person's diet is based in nutrient dense whole foods. So those are going to be, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, starches that are appropriate for those people, healthy fats. And in my opinion, if that's where the majority of somebody's diet is coming from, then they're off to a really good start. Now, obviously, if somebody has a lot of fat to lose, a general change in food quality can usually elicit some pretty significant fat loss. But as somebody gets closer to their actual end goal of what they want their body to look like, it does require a lot more attention to detail. So in the very beginning, a really general approach of just switching food quality can work pretty well. But as somebody gets down to the nitty gritty, it usually requires them to do a little bit of tracking their food and then also a little bit of tweaking of the macronutrients, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates.
And what does your diet look like? Can you give us like a sample breakfast, lunch, dinner that you normally would go through?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, I wake up in the morning and I'm not usually super hungry. I get into my office. I usually have some coffee. In the morning, I usually will have lunch right around 11 or 12, and that's going to be a big salad. So usually lots of greens. Lately, I've been experimenting a little bit, kind of as a side note, with doing a lot more carbohydrates because I've started to do a lot more strength training combined with more Brazilian jiu-jitsu and Thai boxing and things like that. So I've been increasing my carbohydrates and reducing fats a tiny bit, nothing crazy. So my lunches are usually going to be a big salad with a lean protein, as many veggies as I can fit in the container, and then usually some kind of starch. So sometimes that might be beans. Sometimes lately I've been liking chopping up corn tortillas and tossing them in there, or sweet potatoes. Snacks throughout the day are going to be things, in a pinch, sometimes a protein bar, but other times, cottage cheese with fruit or, other veggies and fruits and things like that as well. Dinner is usually going to be one of my bigger meals just because it's the time when I'm not really on the go. So usually at home, that's going to be a pretty solid whack of starch. So that could be, a big thing of oatmeal with some, ground turkey burger, and a veggie, or it could be a big potato, a bunch of roasted veggies, and then, chicken or something like that. So it kind of varies. It's tough because I don't necessarily always have an extremely set day, but the majority of the things that I eat, I try to get as many vegetables as I can throughout the day. I usually have some forms of dairy to help bump up the protein. So, cottage cheese or Greek yogurt with a little bit of fruit, typically before workout. And then after my workouts and at night is usually when I have the largest meal of the day. And that's going to be a really solid whack of protein, a bunch of veggies, and then a good source of starch.
It's so interesting enough. I read in your bio at one point you had some negative reaction to legumes, and I think you said that you'll have beans sometimes during
Yeah.
lunch. What's changed, I guess?
So interestingly enough, probably about a year and a half ago, 2 years, I got a really bad staph infection.
Mhm.
And so once I got that staph infection, I went to the doctor and had to get on a course of antibiotics. And I hadn't taken any kind of antibiotics in many, many years. And it absolutely wrecked my digestion. So I felt really cognitively off. I did not feel very good overall for about 2 weeks. And during that course of time, I essentially gained like 8 or 10 pounds. And it was, some of it I absolutely probably was water weight, but afterwards, after I finished with the antibiotics, I was just a lot kind of fluffier than I wanted to be. And so I kind of went on this, I tried to go back to using more of a low carb approach. That's what I had followed for quite a while, was more of like a paleo-esque low carb approach. But when I finished up this round of antibiotics and I went back to trying to lose the fat that I gained while I was on it, low carb and my digestion they just didn't work well together anymore. So one of the biggest things was I kind of had a teeter-totter where I could lose a little bit of fat, but my digestion would be pretty poor on low carb, or I could kind of tilt the scale the other way and I could have my digestion be better, but losing fat got to be a little bit more of a struggle. So I started to actually play with increasing my carbohydrates quite a bit, and keeping a better eye on what my total calories were and, how many grams of fat, how many grams of carbs and proteins and things like that I was getting in. And I figured out that if I dropped fats a little bit, but I started to incorporate a lot more starchy foods, my digestion really improved. And then I was actually able to significantly lose more body fat than I had in the past and get as lean as I've ever been, while actually performing better in the gym and having more energy throughout the day and things like that. So I started off in this all with a pretty paleo tilt to everything. And since then, I've become a lot more kind of flexible with food choices and, really the thing is to find what works the best for somebody, because that's typically what they're going to be able to stick to for a longer period of time is, by being more inclusive with foods, I think it's just a much better long-term approach. It allows you to enjoy things socially much more. It allows you to experiment with foods. And so that's kind of for the past year, what I've really been doing is experimenting with a lot of foods that I had actually removed off the table for quite a while. And just kind of seeing how I react to them these days. And legumes is one of the ones that I do fine with. I'm able to tolerate a lot more carbohydrates now than I probably was 2 years ago, but I'm also a lot more active. So for me, it's been a lot more self-experimenting in the past year and drawing less of a line in the sand about, these are the foods I'm going to eat and these are the foods I'm not going to eat. But there are still some ones that don't make me feel that great. So, like too many glutinous foods will not make my digestion feel super well. And so that's kind of my reason for including a lot more foods that I had once kind of excluded.
So how would you recommend someone goes about finding what foods they have a problem with? Because I think for a lot of people, it's tough to figure out, oh, was it the, whatever, the bagel that they had, or was it the glass of milk that they had that really caused the problem? Do you have any recommendations on that?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think that some food testing can be helpful, but at the same time, you may end up with a whole laundry list of foods that they want you to try to exclude for the time being. I think one of the easiest ways to do it is to just incorporate an elimination diet where you pull all the foods out for roughly 30 days. And then as you start to incorporate them back in, you do one food at a time and you give yourself about 3 to 4 days with just that one food included. One of the biggest things that I see that is a problem with a lot of folks is when they finish up a exclusion period, they'll start incorporating too many foods too closely together. And because some people are what you would deem kind of late responders, so their reaction to a food can take upwards of 4 days, 3 to 4 days. What will happen is if you had a food that could be a possible reaction on the first day and then another food that was a possible reaction on the third day, you can't really ever tell which one it was. So I would recommend trying to exclude all the foods for a minimum of 30 days and then introducing one new food every 3 to 4 days and just kind of keeping a little log, keeping maybe a little pad with yourself to note at, the 2 hour, the 4 hour, the 6 hour, whatever kind of frequency the person would like, just kind of getting in touch and seeing how they feel after eating that food.
So when you say eliminate all the foods, what during those 30 days, what are they eating?
It kind of depends on what foods they would be choosing to eliminate, though. So it'd be highly individual. There are going to be people that might not do well with, gluten. There are people that may not do super well with dairy. Soy is another one that some people don't do well with. Vegetable oils. I think a pretty good place to start is honestly more of a kind of stricter paleo approach to see what they do and don't react well with, and then kind of personalizing it from there.
So, okay, let me back up. So, I mean, is it do the testing, see what issues the testing says, and then say, all right, I'm going to eliminate. Let's say you do the testing and it says, oh, you have problems with dairy and gluten, eliminate those. Or should you just do paleo for the 30 days and then slowly add in the dairy, the gluten, et cetera, and see how it works?
I think it kind of depends on what somebody would really like to do. So some
Right.
people, I've worked with people who have done the testing and they came to me and then we kind of periodically reduce some of those foods. There are the people who probably don't have the money to do the testing because it can be expensive and would rather just go the paleo approach. So if you're going to do the food testing, I would try to exclude all those foods for a period of time and then try to reintroduce them once every 3 to 4 days. The other approach would just be the basic paleo one where you remove all the foods you could have a reaction to and then incorporate them in kind of that same schedule.
Gotcha. All right, I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit about your story and how you got in more into the consulting role, more into your own entrepreneurial journey. So you were working as a teacher, and
Mhm.
then talk about the transition. I mean, because it's a big jump to go from working as a steady paycheck to making, it sounds like all your money right now is like a nutritionist. So how did
Yeah.
that transition happen?
So it was a little bit abrupt, to be honest. The biggest thing was that I wanted to take a chance. And so when I jumped into doing it full time, in the very beginning, I didn't honestly 100% know what I was doing. I had to get really, really resourceful with funds for a period of time. And I think one of the biggest things that I kind of underestimated was I thought that if I just put my message out there, that I was going to get clients and that they were going to, open the doors and people would just be bum rushing the door to become a client. And I realized you have to try to provide value first for everybody. So it could be that somebody may read your blog 25, 30 times. Somebody may get, 30 of your newsletters before they ever even contact you, not even to become a client, but just to reply to something that you had to say. And for me, I think one of the biggest things was just realizing that it's going to be it's going to be a long road. And if you just stick with it, there's going to be tough times, but there's also going to be times when it's 100% worth it. And if you choose to stick with it, my biggest opinion is that good things will happen. You just have to kind of keep pushing forward in a lot of regards.
So for you, most of your clients then come from your blog or the podcast, or how do you get most of the clients at this point?
So at this point, I've put enough stuff out that I've started to get a lot of organic Google searches. So people will find me on Google. I get a decent amount of referrals from current clients as well. And then there are some strategic partnerships that I have with gyms in the Portland area. So generally, I will go in, I'll do some free talks for them. I'll provide some free, 30-minute nutrition consultations for their clients to see if it's a good fit. And then from there, usually once I can show them that I can provide value and that I'm able to help them get to their goals, we kind of work out how they're going to become a client and get them onboarded.
How'd you go about getting those, like the gyms, to those strategic partnerships? How'd you go about getting that?
So a lot of the times what I'll do is I will send them an email and I will offer to come in and just do a talk for free. Or sometimes a few of the gyms have found me and they have realized that they have a lot of people there who specialize in the exercise part of it and the strength training, the conditioning and everything like that. But they don't have anybody to really refer to that is a nutrition person. So I'll go in and chat with the owner and whoever else contacted me and just kind of make sure that it is a good fit. And then for other folks, it's just kind of going in and, doing a talk and providing as much free value as possible and, offering something at the very end of the talk saying, if you'd like to do a free 30-minute phone consultation to kind of see where you're at, see where you want to go, and then help, start building the plan to get there, let's talk on the phone, and then converting those people into clients and showing them the value that you can provide them and showing them that you can give them the steps to get to their goals, but it's going to require them to become a client.
Gotcha. And so if someone were to, let's say they are in a similar situation to you, they have a job, they're looking to quit it and do more of be their own boss type of thing. What would you say is the first step to start a blog, to start a podcast? What would you say the first step is?
I would say get a website up first and foremost so that people have some place to launch, obviously. And then I think a blog is a great place to start. I think that it's just a good platform for people to kind of sharpen their sword and to get better at it. I mean, I was going back and looking at some of my oldest blog posts the other day to kind of make some changes to them. And man, they're horrible. They are not good. And it's going to take a while to get them to a place where you even want anybody to read them. But once you really also learn who your audience is, one of the big things is you can start to kind of speak their language and to speak to them. And once you start to do that, that's when I at least noticed that I started to get a lot more engagement on social media, on my blog, people replying to newsletters and basic things like that.
So you said that one of the big things for you was now you're starting to get some organic Google traffic. Is there a strategic way you went about so you'd rank in Google, or was it kind of by luck? How'd you do that?
So one of the biggest things that I noticed was when I started to put out books on Amazon, that actually bumped up my Google ranking pretty significantly. And then also on top of it, just a steady stream of content. So every single week I have my own podcast, I have a blog, I have a newsletter. And then another big part of it was also doing guest blogs for other people that had a much larger audience than myself. Getting those link backs from companies like Precision Nutrition, Barbell Shrugged, Breaking Muscle, Pure Pharma, and companies like that was also something that helped to drive a pretty significant amount of traffic, and then also allowed me to rank higher in Google as well.
Let's back up there. So Barbell Shrugged and some of those other ones you mentioned, so you did guest posts for them, is that right?
Yeah. So a
That's
long time
awesome.
ago, I wrote for Barbell Shrugged. I think I did 2 or 3 articles for them. Um, I I wrote for On It Academy, and I actually have kind of a funny story with them. So what happened was I kept emailing On It trying to blog for them, and I just couldn't get through to anybody that would really let me write for them. And I guessed the CEO's email. I put about 5 or 6 emails in the to line, and it turned
Mm.
out that one of them was right. And so I got an email directly back from Aubrey Marcus saying, "Hey Alex, thanks for writing us. I would love to have you blog for us. I'll get you in touch with the right person." And the very next day, I had an email from the person who organizes all their content.
That's an awesome story. Okay, so and for On It, why? What topic did you say that you wanted to blog about? Like, I mean, because I'm sure they get messages all the time saying, "Hey, let me write on your website."
Oh, so for them, when I very first contacted them, I had actually written for Barbell Shrugged first.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that I did in that email that I felt like was probably going to differentiate things was that Aubrey had just had some of the people from Barbell Shrugged on his podcast. So we had Mike Bledsoe and Doug Larson. So he had just finished having them on his podcast, and I had seen that they were kind of developing a relationship. And so in writing to On It, what I did was I made sure to include the links that I wrote for Barbell Shrugged as a way to kind of help lend the trust, to show that, hey, I've written for these other people that you have a relationship with, that you know, that you like, and that you trust, and they've let me write for them. So it was a little bit of kind of social proof, and also kind of lending their trust to me, I thought would be a good way to get my foot in the door with On It and to be able to write for them.
And so, okay, then let's back up to Barbell Shrugged. How'd you get in the door with that one?
I just bugged them.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's funny because there really isn't any magic to it in a lot of regards. If they don't want you to write for them, they will probably eventually just tell you no. But I kind of made a habit out of I made a big list of people that I wanted to write for. And so I just kept emailing them, and I stayed persistent but not annoying. That is the biggest thing that I think a lot of people kind of miss the boat on, is you need to be persistent. You need to kind of constantly ping these people if you'd like to write for them, but at the same time, don't be over the top annoying, because they have a full-time job themselves, probably working 80 to 100 hours a week. But if you can kind of set yourself apart by being the person who keeps on following up with them, I think that after 3 or 4 emails, sometimes a lot of people will just give up. But if you continue to push forward and say, hey, I just wanted to check back in. You said to email you in 2 weeks, and that was, 3 emails ago, then eventually they might give you a shot. And you're going to get a lot of no's, but if you get enough yeses and they're for the right people, then I think that can be a really great jumping board to be able to kind of push your brand forward and to write for some really cool people.
And so, how often are we? When you say like, don't be annoying, is that mean email once a week? Like, even if you don't hear back from them, how do you know where that line is?
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
I think that's a good question. I'm not sure that I necessarily have the answer to that. My usual rule of thumb was every 2 to 3 weeks, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not too often at all. Yeah. It's funny because as someone that has a podcast, I get emails every once in a while, and sometimes I just honestly I forget, or I remove it thinking the person's
Hmm.
not serious. I've had people ask me to be on their show, and I've just straight up told them, I'm like, all right, or someone that was like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast, and will you be like my first guest? I'm like, how about you do 6 episodes before me? I'll be your 7th guest, because
Hmm.
and then the person never ended up emailing me back, so they never even ended up going forward and doing the podcast. But it's true, it's like you kind of want to see that people are committed before you say yeah. You don't want to just say yes to everybody that comes along.
Yeah. It took me about, I want to say, like 4 to 6 months to write for Precision Nutrition.
Oh,
It was
really?
not, yeah, it was not easy. I lost track of the lady. She went on maternity leave. She came back. So it was all over the place. But the biggest thing was I just kept checking in, and eventually we hopped on the phone, and her and I were joking around and laughing. I go, man, if you really wanted to, if you wanted to like prevent somebody or deter them from contacting you, I'm like, this is a pretty good vetting process, but at least you guys now know that I'm pretty committed and I really want to write for you. So
And what was that article about on precision nutrition?
that one was about a better way to tell that you're losing fat besides the scale. So I think it's called 7 Reasons the Scale Suck, and Better Ways to Measure Your Progress.
And how do you decide for On It, I assume it's a different kind of article than Barbell Shrugged, which is a different kind of article than Precision Nutrition. How do you
Hmm.
decide exactly what you're going to write for each blog?
So for them, a lot of the times, I will give them a few ideas of what I'm really interested in. And it may be that what I'm interested in isn't necessarily what they would like, or they see maybe an aspect of what I'm currently kind of nerding out on that they want to pull out and vet out a little bit more. Sometimes I'll just get in the communication with them and start talking about, what are the current things that they are writing about? Is there any specific topic that they would like people to cover? And if they don't have anything, then I'll generally be like, hey, this is what I'm currently interested in. This is what I am learning more and more about. This is what I'm really passionate about. So it's kind of a little bit of a toss up between what they're interested in and what I'm interested in, and kind of finding a bit of a middle ground. But for the majority of them, when they write back, they'll say, hey, send us a list of some things that you would like to write about, or specific topics that you're interested in. So.
Right.
It's tough to say because no one of those has been the exact same as the other. So everybody kind of interacts with you a little bit differently. So some of the companies would like you to send them ideas. Other companies will come back to you and say, we'd like you to write about this.
So the other thing that I thought was really interesting that you talked about earlier was that writing Amazon books actually helped your Google rank. Is that because in the Amazon page there's a link to your website, or how does that work?
Yeah, so in your author bio on the Amazon page, you can link back to your blog. You can connect it to your social media. So if you go ahead and in your author bio on Amazon, you link back to your blog and your social media and things like that, you will get the link backs from it.
That's awesome. And let's talk about that. What are some of the books that you wrote for and you have published on Amazon first, actually?
Yeah, so the very first one that I wrote was the Proven Testosterone Solution. One of the big things was that I saw a lot of books out there that were kind of on this subject, but a lot of them were pitching something that was just completely untrue. They wanted you to take a specific supplement, or they kind of trying to sell a magic bullet. And what I really wrote about was why people typically have reductions in testosterone, how you can go about fixing it naturally, and kind of giving people a more sane approach that is explaining to them it's not going to be a magic bullet, a magic pill. It's not going to happen overnight. It really comes down to diet, lifestyle, nutrition, and exercise, and just doing it in a much smarter fashion. And that's actually an interesting one because that very first book, I wrote it and I let fear get the better of me.
Mm.
So I kind of had some of those self-limiting beliefs, that self-doubt where I was like, well, who are you to write a book about this? Like things like that. So I honestly broke it down in the very beginning and put it out as a blog. And I had probably 3 or 4 different people come up to me in person and say, hey, I really like that blog. That was phenomenal. Do you have any more information on this subject? And it was that really showed me that at that moment, I had an obligation to something much bigger than me. Other people out there were resonating with this message, and it could benefit a lot more people. So that was kind of the push that I needed to really go ahead and write the full book and put it out on Amazon.
That's a really powerful story because I think that's a lot of people. No matter what you're writing a book about, I haven't written a book on Amazon. That's something I'm looking to do. I have another company business podcast YouTube channel where I talk about e-commerce. That's my main gig, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to get around to writing it. And I don't necessarily think that my fear is who am I, but it's just it's kind of good to hear that and remind me that I should probably get around to actually writing this book.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the biggest things too with anything that's worthwhile. I had that same kind of thing with like uh, blogging and also podcasting, because each one of those it gives up a different level of vulnerability. You really put yourself out there a lot more for people to criticize, for people to disagree, for it just seems like a whole other level of putting yourself out there when you write something and people can read it, or when you're on a podcast and people can listen to it, or when you put a book out there and you say, hey, I think that this is valuable enough for you to give me your money for it. That's a whole other level of vulnerability. And I think that getting beyond that sometimes can cause a little bit of self-doubt. But the biggest thing is that if you can push past that and realize that what you're doing is going to help at least one other person, then it really makes you look beyond your own self-limiting beliefs, your own self-doubt, to really think, well, this is bigger than me. I have an obligation to other people out there.
And so, I'm sure you have a lot of things in mind, but what things are you looking to do to enhance your blog to enhance your business in the future? Are you continuing to work on blogging? Are you writing more books? Like, what is in store for 2017?
So I just finished up my last book, and that was kind of a pain to get done. So what happened was I had somebody who edited it, and I hired somebody, and it just wasn't working out. They kept on missing a lot of mistakes, so I ended up editing that till 4:30 in the morning on my own to have it out on the right day. So I'm probably going to take a little bit of a break on writing books for the time being. In 2017, my goal is really to just max out my clients, to get as many as I possibly can. Um, and then something that I'd like to actually transition into doing a lot more of is to doing more like video blogs and putting out a lot more informational videos and things like that. I'm getting more comfortable in front of the screen, in front of people talking and things like that. So my goals in 2017 are really going to revolve around getting as many videos out there as I possibly can, getting as many clients as I possibly can, and then also just continue on with kind of the way that things are going. I'm pretty happy with my blog, but it can always get better. My podcast, I definitely want to start getting a lot more guests on there. It's something that I would like to work a lot more on. It almost feels a little bit kind of like a side project these days. I don't give it the attention that it deserves. Those would probably be the biggest things for right now in terms of what I want to do. I'd also like to run a few more group fat loss challenges. So I'm actually currently in the middle of something right now that your listeners might find kind of interesting. A large majority of the people that I work with have found my message, and they are people who have been lifelong crash dieters or yo-yo dieters. And that's nothing that I have ever really experienced myself. You know, I've changed my nutrition over a period of time, but I've never been on a crash diet. I've never really worried too much about calorically restricting myself or anything like that. And I'm actually on day 3 of an experiment of putting myself on a crash diet intentionally and doing a daily vlog about it every single day. Part of the reason that I'm doing this is because I just want to be able to walk a mile in these people's shoes. I want to be able to coach them better. I want to understand where they're coming from the mindset, all the way down to body image, all the way down to, you know, their relationship with food. And while I'm doing this, I'm also creating a daily vlog, which is something that I've never done myself either. So that's actually currently what I'm working on right now. That doesn't necessarily pertain directly to 2017, but it's kind of leading up right to 2017.
Awesome. Yeah, I think YouTube and video in general, I think that's really the next low-hanging fruit in general for most people. I think obviously you were able to do it successfully, but for most people that say, oh, I want to start a blog, I'm like, it's a lot harder than starting a successful YouTube channel just because there's so much more competition with blogs. I think people are much more willing to watch a 5-minute video than they are to read an article. So I think YouTube's definitely the way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah. So that's definitely something I'm working on. I don't have it down. I don't really have anything down in business, honestly. I feel like there's so much to learn all the time that it's like it keeps me very very kind of centered and grounded. I don't think I'd ever be able to get a big head in business just because, you know, you really know so little about everything that there's always, you know, my blog could always be better. My podcast could always be better. I could always better serve my clients. It's just the work is never really done. And I think that that's one of the most exciting and kind of fascinating parts about it. And I'm still learning tons about nutrition every day too. You know, that's the biggest thing is just, I think keeping an open mind and being willing to learn is a huge aspect of this that in the past 2 to 3 years has really grown for me.
Absolutely. So I have one more question before we wrap up here. And this is more of a general question. It doesn't necessarily have to do with diet, entrepreneurship, anything that we've talked about. You can answer it however you want. But basically, my audience obviously is mostly people in their 20s. And if you could give advice to people in their 20s, just general advice, do you have any kind of tips, anything you would say to this audience?
I would say, you know, it's going to sound kind of cliche and funny, but find what you're really passionate about. And you may not know that right now. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot of people who have gone through college and aren't doing what they once did or are not in the career path. Be open and find what you're really passionate about. I mean, finding nutrition, I never thought that I was going to end up in this field, but find what you're passionate about and just really deep dive into it. Learn as much as you possibly can. And in terms of switching over and kind of getting into entrepreneurship, I would say it's probably a better idea to hold down a job and kind of use your passion as a side hustle for a period of time. And then once you're ready to make that jump, transition over and probably do it in a different fashion than I did it. I'm not necessarily, I think that it worked for me because I didn't really give myself a whole lot of other options. It was a little bit of a build your parachute on the way down kind of thing. And if I could go back and do it, I'd probably do it a little bit differently than I did. So I would say, get something that pays the bills, but also find what your passion is and, make it into a bit of a side hustle and continue to work on that until it makes just as much, if not a little bit less than, your day job. And then from there, transition over into your passion project and, spread your wings and enjoy yourself.
Awesome. Alex, where can people find out more about you, connect with you, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so people can find me on Instagram at Evolve Nutritional Therapy. I'm on Twitter and Snapchat at EvolveNTPDX. And then, Facebook is Evolve Nutritional Therapy LLC. And my website is evolvenutritionaltherapy.com.
Perfect. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Travis, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter. And I release a new video every Monday. And by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.